Historian and former Justice of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Sumption, severely criticized the, quote, diversion of academic disciplines to a task for which they are usually ill suited, namely the reform of modern society so as to redress perceived inequalities, notably of race. In this opinion, the discipline of history has been particularly vulnerable to the discrediting and distortion caused by these endeavors. While historical scholarship involves judicious selection from a vast and usually incomplete body of material, he perceives a major danger to historical integrity when selection is based on criteria that are derived from a modern ideological agenda. Earlier this week, I covered an article that was the critique of the American Physical Society's article on bullcrap article on observing whiteness in introductory physics. But I wanted to come back to the journal that published it. It's specifically called European Review here, and it is published by Cambridge University Press. So, as I said to Cambridge University Press, props to them for publishing something that the American Physical Society should have published, rather than claiming all sorts of nonsense things about it. But they actually have a special issue in which that critique appears, and that's what I wanted to highlight. It is a very nice critique, and as you can tell, vast majority of these articles are open access. So I encourage you to go take a look at that. It is, of course, linked in the description below, so I'll just link to this page, and I encourage you to go explore a lot of the other articles, because this is a bunch of well-written essays that I've seen here. I am not going to go through all of them with this video, but I did want to highlight a few things that I thought were really, really relevant in here. In particular, with the introduction, you can actually see a number of folks in here have commented, and you can see some altimetrics showing up here on the right-hand side, which basically, where is the article mentioned, where has it appeared, and a lot of these are going to get, there's going to be some mentions here with respect to the whole thing, so count that way. Perils for Science in Democracies and Authoritarian Countries. So I want to go through the editorial. I'm going to read a bit from the introduction, and then I'm going to point out a few of the other articles that are in here, but I encourage you to go read the rest, because I do think, go read them all if you can, because there's some really good stuff written in here. So the editorial first. The Scientific Method, which is written by Alban Kellenbauer. The scientific method, the procedure objectively establishing facts about the natural and social world through observation and experimental testing, is the widely accepted fundamental framework for a wide array of research, ranging from the formal and natural sciences to the social and cultural sciences. The pursuit of knowledge by means of reason fueled the scientific revolution in the second half of the 16th and first half of the 17th centuries. It thus paved the way for the Age of Enlightenment, with its wide-reaching influences on science itself, but also on sociology, philosophy, economics, law, and the role of religion in society. By its very principles, the scientific method implies the rejection of dogmata, and instead the willingness to be proven wrong, independent of shifting political ideologies and agendas. The goal of science, the telos of science, many times over as I've said it, is the pursuit of the truth. Unsurprisingly, throughout history, science has faced and still faces opposition from groups and institutions whose power it calls into question. Galileo himself, arguably the father of modern science, was tried, found guilty of heresy, and sentenced to imprisonment by the Roman Inquisition for promoting heliocentrism, which was based on his empirical observations but ran contrary to religious dogma. Fun fact about that, I think a lot of that heresy and imprisonment had to do with the Catholic Church at the time, the early Catholic Church, and I think it wasn't until Pope St. John Paul II, because he was canonized, when he was in his papacy, who finally apologized for what the Catholic Church had done at the time and their role involved in it. But anyway, during the first half of the 20th century, both fascist and communist regimes, although ideologically opposed, waged vicious attacks against science. They exerted control over researchers to promote ideas aligned with their ideology, appointed loyal figures to key positions, removed undesirable scholars, and used censorship and propaganda to shape public opinion. Another hallmark of the ruinous influence of political extremism on science is the promotion of pseudoscientific theories, often wrapped in nationalist garments of collective identity such as Nazi racial theory, Lysenkoism, German physics, and many others. Such tendencies survived well into the 21st century, for instance, with the rejection of a rational approach to the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfounded conspiracy theories and dangerous populist advice influence even the highest political level, culminating in such life-threatening suggestions as to consume bleach against infection, formulated by the 45th President of the United States. This focus issue addresses such dangers from a historical and contemporary perspective. It is the outcome of a symposium entitled Perils for Science in Democracies and Authoritarian Countries, which was held in January 2023 at Ben Gurion University of Negev in Beersheba, Israel. Acknowledging that attacks on science have proven to occur across the entire political spectrum, participants focused on challenges faced by the research system, which, although in different forms and with different intensity in the countries and contexts of our readers, represent a danger in and for today's liberal democracies. Blah. By means of a historical contextualization, the authors argue that with the revival of identity-centered politics emerging at both ends of the political spectrum, threat and damage to careers, the silencing of dissenting voices, and the cancellation of events, these movements conjure echoes of extremist ideologies of the past. They warn that any departure from long-established and proven principles such as the scientific method or individual merit-based equality of opportunity will have serious negative consequences for the future of science and technology also in the Western world. I would argue just for the world in general. The editorial board of European Review welcomes discussions on the controversies between politics and science, on the state of scholarly inquiry and research, and on the challenges they face throughout the world. Readers holding diverging opinions from those expressed by the authors of this issue are encouraged to voice them constructively by submitting a response to this journal. And if you happen to be watching and you disagree, I encourage you to do that too. That is the proper way to do it. So, let's see. In the collection here, the other place I want to go is the introduction, because the introduction has a lot of really good stuff in here about the issue. So this is written by Ut Deichmann, which I do not know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, so I apologize if I am not. Science has always been influenced by various societal factors, such as its politicization, funding constraints, market forces, and the challenges posed by opposing ideologies such as creationism or debunked racial theories. The articles in this special issue explore the challenges facing science and in democracies and authoritarian countries, with a focus on the impact of new movements and policies operating under the names diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, decolonizing science, wokeism, and social justice. While these policies are meant to promote equality and justice for underrepresented groups, they often conflict with the principle of equality of opportunity that is based on individual merit rather than group identity. The essays were written by a multinational group of scientists and scholars invited by the Jacques Loeb Center for the History and Philosophy of the Life Sciences at Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. They provide different scientific and historical perspectives on how these policies pose a threat to the scientific merit system, the level of scientific performance, and the notion of scientific truth that affects countries to varying degrees, most strongly the United States. They point to the current suppression of free speech and open discourse in academia, and the devastating effects of identity and race politics, and of the campaigns for decolonizing science and culture. For example, advocates of decolonization of science and the humanities claim that mathematics education in schools in the US is Eurocentric, racist, and supremacist, and reforms are being implemented that lower the level of mathematics education in the name of equality. Now, I want to correct that, because it's not in the name of equality, it's in the name of equity, to try and get equal outcomes. Shafting kids in the process by not challenging them, but there we go. Changes such as these could have serious consequences for the future of science and technology as well as the global economy. Yes, if you're utterly lowering standards in the name of equity, not equality, mind you, in the name of equity, what is that going to mean for the next generation of scientists who can't do math? We have no logic thinking perspective, which you need to actually be a programmer and code different things, such as the very, very many environmental models that exist, be it a climate model or hydrology model or a crop model or any number, or a weather forecasting model, any number of those. You do actually need some logic base and some physics understanding and math skills for all of those things. and actually quite a lot, one might argue. Um, do, 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 do. To provide a historical perspective, some of the essays also explore the historical context of political interference with science, including the implementation of racial principles into academia through anti Jewish measures in Nazi Germany, and political interference with biology in the USSR and post Soviet Russia. An example is the creation of German physics in Germany in the 1920s. The originators advocated a ban on the theoretical part of physics that was too complicated for many and that they later labeled Jewish physics. During the Nazi era, the movement succeeded in abolishing some shares of theoretical physics, but after a few years, Nazi leaders reinstated theoretical physics because they realized they needed it for the war effort. Context there is World War II. Upholding the lessons of the past, equal treatment, and the system of merit based on individual achievements, regardless of race, gender, and class, have been long standing guiding principles to reduce injustice and at the same time maintain high standards in science. Conversely, diversity and equity suggests or even mandates equality in terms of the absolute numbers of people in specific subgroups. The resulting political pressure on individuals and institutions is not expected to lead to the same dire consequences as in authoritarian countries. However, according to many commentators, the damage done to careers and the downgrading of scientific standards will have long-term repercussions, not only for individuals, but for science as a whole. The policies and movements that were initially well-intended and aimed at fighting discrimination have evolved into a bureaucratic machine whose primary goal is to eliminate disparities in representation at any cost, as noted by Percy Dieft and colleagues 2021. In his speech, A Climate of Intimidation, Penn, poets, essays, novelists, President Ayad Akhtar highlights the dangers of identity policy for all intellectual enterprises. He points to the paradox of increased free speech through social media while also experiencing a rise in punitive interdiction and fear of speaking freely. Quote, "For as speech has become clearly freer in one sense, we find ourselves in the midst of a cultural shift in the United States to a discursive environment rife with punitive interdiction, where today's politics of identity imposes contradictory moral maps about what speech is acceptable to what groups and what speech isn't. A climate of digital intimidation is on the rise, and with it a fear to speak and even think freely, which is not good. On the rise as well is a profound and widespread intolerance to points of view deemed unacceptable or even immoral." Henry Louis Gates, an Afro-American literary critic and professor at Harvard University, complained about an intellectual tribalism and the focus on race and identity for the legitimation of an author. He considers this tribalism to be a sellout of human fantasy. For example, the first comprehensive biography of Medgar Evers, one of the leading protagonists of the American civil rights movements in the 1960s, written by a leading Evers expert, did not find a publisher because Evers was black and the author was white. The notion of decolonial scholarship has been dissected by French scholars in a recent debate in France as a deconstructionist device used to attack every accomplishment of Western society in literature, art, music, and even science. Leading scientific institutions such as Journal Science and Nature, grant agencies, and university senates are yielding to the pressure of activists or acting in anticipatory obedience, partly guided by feelings of guilt. And I want to make a point here, actually, on that note. If you've read Shelby Steele's book, White Guilt, he actually goes into this in depth. Or he talks about how folks seem to be wanting to do this because of what happened in the past and feeling guilty about it or being made to feel guilty about it. That's the point I want to make there, is there's actually a lot of good written works about that, more or less. Historian and former Justice of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Sumption, severely criticized the, quote, diversion of academic disciplines to a task for which they are usually ill-suited, namely the reform of modern society so as to redress perceived inequalities, notably of race. In this opinion, the discipline of history has been particularly vulnerable to the discrediting and distortion caused by these endeavors. While historical scholarship involves judicious selection from a vast and usually incomplete body of material, he perceives a major danger to historical integrity when selection is based on criteria that are derived from a modern ideological agenda. Quote, "What we have been witnessing is the reshaping of the history of the last 4 centuries to serve as a weapon in current political disputes. Objectivity and truth have been the main casualties." Sutton points to the denial of the complex complexity of history and culture of these political agendas that support a, quote, highly selective approach to the past, which sees everything through the prism of race. Race becomes the supremely important phenomenon, masking every other aspect of a complex culture. Now, I want to speak to that because where this actually gets manifest is a lot of the times you'll see the disparity fallacy, as Coleman Hughes put it. If there's the disparity fallacy thinking basically goes along the lines of if there's a disparity, then some kind of systemic discrimination is the only reason to blame. And that's what they're getting at here, is that kind of thinking, which is actually what's captured right here, is overly simplistic when you're talking about a very complex culture and a very complex society. He warns that the demands of a decolonization may lead to redefine knowledge itself in a way which artificially devalues Western science, citing as an example the decolonization statement of the Mathematical, Physical, and Life Sciences Division of Oxford University that calls for a, quote, broader understanding of what constitutes scientific knowledge, which involves challenging Western-centric ideas of objectivity, expertise, and merit. Oh, dear lordy. Meanwhile, counter-movements against wokeism, identity politics are growing, some of which are also damaging the education system and science. Thus, government actions in Florida against wokeism and DEI are not only removing ideological passages from mathematical textbooks, but according to PEN America are also banning dozens of books that include protagonists of color, LGBT themes, or that touch on race and racism. I question whether or not that's actually the case, but that's a whole different thing. This is more so just about reading the introduction. Similarly, the de facto abolition of tenure in Georgia's public colleges and universities in 2021, and also in other places, is seen as an attack on academic freedom and a flagrant violation of the 1940 Statement on Principles of Academic Freedom and Tenure. I have problems with the AAUP myself, but anyway. Some universities have taken measures to restore academic freedom and defend themselves from the exertion of influence from the outside. An example is the University of Hamburg, which in February 2022 composed a Code of Academic Freedom that the university's president, Professor Dr. Dieter Lenzen, presented to the public as follows. Science and scholarship does not conform to political, religious, or other wishes, but rather to its own guiding principles. In this respect, science and scholarship is inextricably linked to responsibility. Any incursion into academic freedom and any form of curtailment of this freedom must be viewed all the more critically, and real threats such as these must be stopped. So, the debate about free speech inside and outside of classrooms is not new. I conclude with an early 20th century statement by German sociologist Max Weber. Weber is best known for his strong advocacy of the separation of science and values in research, but he considered it necessary for teaching to include a debate on cultural and ethical values. He concluded, quote, the contention that the university teacher should be entirely devoid of passion, and that he should avoid all subjects which threaten to arouse overheated controversies constitutes a narrow-minded, bureaucratic opinion, which every independent teacher must reject. The current suppression, end quote, the current suppression of free debate about what conditions for good science are contributes to its decline. This focus does not pursue political goals or deal with general political campaigns, but focuses on the dangers that identity politics as eligibility criterion and the suppression of academic freedom pose to science, irrespective of the political tendencies they may emanate from. The focus opens with an article by Sergio Kleinerman, I don't know the pronunciation, I apologize, who sees scientific enterprise in the United States seriously challenged by powerful anti-scientific trends. He refers to postmodern relativism, which under the pretext of anti-racism, anti-sexism, and anti-colonialism undermines the foundations of science as a quest for the truth, and radical egalitarian, which under the name of equity erodes the criteria of selection and rewards based on merit. His focus on mathematics, that, as he emphasizes, is the most universal non-racist academic activity in its content as well as its applications. He shows that, contrary to what is claimed today by what he calls the radical equality dogma, gender and ethnic inequalities in the sciences are not primarily the result of discrimination, but of biological, cultural, environmental, and other factors. So, I'm not going to go too much into this, but I do want to point out that a lot of these folks are from a very wide range of backgrounds, and all of them agreeing on one thing, in that when you can't pursue the truth, stuff goes completely haywire in here. And so they're talking about it with respect to medical research. You have Israeli Palestinian German psychologist. Wow. In here from all these kinds of things. What is he talking about? Who works on various projects to prevent radicalization, especially in the field of Islamism, dedicates himself to a fight for democratic values against any kind of anti-Semitism in Germany. Sweet. Okay. Activists of identity policy are also trying to direct some sciences according to their ideology, defaming scientists, canceling lectures, and declaring some fields of research as racist or immoral. According to Mansour, these groups abandoned their original ideas of universality, justice, and criticism of religion, focusing instead on demonstrating their moral superiority. He warns that widespread refusal to debate can causes harms to democracy, whose essence is the exchange of arguments and tolerance of different opinions. So there's a lot of interesting things in here, but I will get down here to the end. We hope this collection of articles highlighting different societal and political threats to various sciences today will contribute to the debate about what the conditions for good science are, and thus help prevent its decline. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. I just want to highlight two of them for you. I'm not going to read through the whole article, but I will read their abstracts for you. Which one? I think it was this one. Another one by Ute here, I believe. Yeah, here it is. One of them in here that I think is worth a very good read. Oh, Andres. Yes, Andres Bicfalvi, I believe is how you pronounce his name, but I am not 100% sure. The notion of truth and sciences in medicine, why it matters, and why we must defend it. Philosophers have described several approaches for scientific research, including causal inference and induction, and the hypothetical deductive method, inference of the best explanation, Bayesian or causal network analysis. There's an and missing in there somewhere, and Bayesian or causal network analysis. Prescriptive truth is dependent upon the values that one brings into scientific inquiry. One may oppose the writings of Bertrand Russell and Helen Longino. The former argues that values may negatively impact inquiry, while Longino argues that values-free research does not exist and we must cope with it. However, Longino proposes a very strict value system which does not allow certain research to be conducted. The problem arises when prescriptive truth becomes hypertrophic, self-righteous, rigid, and unconnected to reality, which is the transformation into ideology. Ideological intrusion into science and medicine, such as with social justice ideology, is indeed a problem in Western democracies. It derived from scholarship originating in the humanities, law, social sciences, branches of philosophy, etc., and then transferred to science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine, STEM. The STEM fields were thought to be immune to SJI, social justice ideology, because of its rigorous methodology, but the hyper-specialization and absence of training in the humanities made it vulnerable. These intrusions into STEM and the amplification of the last 2 to 3 years are potentially due to concept creep, psychological contamination, herd behavior, and, for activists, strategic equivocation, Mott and Bailey. The Mott and Bailey fallacy. Put out something that no one would, you put out something crazy and then you retreat to something that no one would deny, essentially, is the Mott and Bailey. Blah. By denying truth and reality, science is reduced to a pointless if entertaining game, a meaningless if exacting exercise, and a destinationless if enjoyable journey. Now the characteristic doctrine of modern irrationalists, as we have seen, are emphasis on will as opposed to thought and feeling, a glorification of power, belief in intuition positing of propositions as opposed to observational and inductive testing. So that's one of the really good ones. That's a very much more thick philosophical read, but I do recommend it. The other one I was going to recommend, actually, is probably the most read one here, which is this one, Critical Social Justice Subverts Scientific Publishing, which the name would be familiar because Anna has appeared on this channel. This is another one from Anna Krylov and Jay Tansman. Here, the abstract in this one is actually very brief. Critical social justice subverts scientific publishing. The politicization of science, the infusion of ideology into the scientific enterprise, threatens the ability of science to serve humanity. Today, the greatest such threat comes from a set of ideological viewpoints collectively referred to as critical social justice. This contribution describes how CSJ has detrimentally affected scientific publishing by means of social engineering, censorship, and the suppression of scholarship. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. From their work and Anna's of course been very, very active in this field, and I thank her immensely for it. Here in particularly pointing out the pointing out the differences here in that the truth with a critical social justice, which again is rooted in postmodernism, which does not think objective reality exists at all, as opposed to constructivists, which do think objective reality exists. There's two very different things there. And you can see here what they actually do when you're talking about that with respect to current issues going on. Anyway, so that is what I wanted to do, was just to introduce this special issue. I do highly recommend you go read it. It is quite good. It will, of course, this page will be linked in the description. And as you can see, many of these are open access, so not behind a paywall, which means you can access and read them all as you'd like, and comment as you see fit yourself. Well, they don't take comments here, but if you want to write something into them to comment, that is something you can do. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way of the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everybody.